I knew I had this one-to-one with this person. He was like, what can you do for us? This person is a data scientist. This person is my medical lead. Like, why should you be in the team, in the leadership team? And it's a very earnest question, unprepared. I just told him in the moment, it was that, what I will help you do is to get to your business outcomes faster and better with technology. So I think people don't really understand why Amazon works so well. I think one of the reasons they work well is that they force you to write a document. And we don't start meetings like we're talking about each other. We just bring the document in, you read it, and then you basically agree with my recommendation because you have the problem, the option, the recommended option, or you have a different recommendation which I agree to. So that discipline helps people understand where you're coming from. And you have to be able to understand that you need experts to do things, not managers, especially when the technology is not mature. So then it's also a question of being able to articulate the solution and get people to see the solution and get them behind you. Nothing happens in big organizations without you having a broad support, especially if you're doing noble things. I did many noble things.
ठीक है जी, इधर आओ, करें शुरू? Okay. In today's episode, we're exploring the transformative power of AI in the enterprise. Our guest is Sanjeev Jha, a seasoned executive and thought leader in digital transformation, enterprise AI, and data-driven marketing. Sanjeev has recently served as the executive director of digital and AI enablement at Genentech, where he spearheaded cutting-edge AI initiatives that have driven remarkable commercial outcomes. Before Genentech, Sanjeev led strategic teams at tech giants like Amazon and Salesforce, accelerating growth through innovative AI-driven strategies. Today, Sanjeev will share his insights on how enterprises can best harness AI to revolutionize their marketing, operations, and customer experience. We will learn firsthand what it takes to lead successful AI transformations at scale. Sanjeev, welcome to the episode.
Thank you. Thank you, Manish. Thank you for having me. Thank you for that kind introduction.
Sanjeev, you began your career in brand management and marketing. You were at Marico and PepsiCo. That was, I believe, early on in your career, right? And then you moved into strategic consulting at McKinsey. Then you've done work in tech, worked at Motorola, Amazon, Salesforce, have been a business leader there. And most recently, you've been in healthcare at Genentech. Can you walk us through that journey? How did it all start first?
I think most of our journeys are a function of our habits and the choices we make. And there is some luck involved, but it's largely choices. Not to complicate my career further, but I actually started my career at SAIL. I was the youngest management trainee at SAIL in Bhilai Steel Plant.
So SAIL, the Steel Authority of India,
yes.
Of course in India. And what city was that? Bhilai?
Bhilai. And okay. I was appointed as the personal and IR head when I was barely 21 for 6,000 contractual labor in open cast iron ore mines in Rajhara. That was just prior to my MBA at IIM Ahmedabad. Post Ahmedabad, most of my career was in marketing, and I loved that field. It was not even a second thought to me as to what I would do. It was just what I wanted to do. I think the choice to come to US was largely family induced, and it was the level of maturity I had at that time. I took a decision to come here, right? But once you take decisions, you just work to make them right. So once I got here, I realized that I didn't really like the kind of companies I'd come into. And so I went and did a second MBA to get access to the kind of company I wanted to work for. And the choices I had at that time, I think, were Sara Lee, Unilever, and McKinsey. And McKinsey I thought would pay off my loans faster. Besides the fact it seemed more interesting, because at Unilever I would start again as assistant brand manager, and I was to manage assistant brand managers in India. There's very interesting stories along the way, but basically if you look at my career path, it's a tale of two halves. One was just the regular post-MBA, get into the brand management, then get into consulting, then basically get back into operating roles, right? So a decade of consulting, either with McKinsey or at Motorola, and then at PepsiCo for Tropicana. And then basically operating roles. I was CMO at Sears Home Services, a $3 billion division. Then I was CMO at Perfetti for US. They make Mentos and Airheads. And then the natural progression to business unit leadership at Amazon. I was a director for Kindle and launched Kindle in India, Kindle content, right? I think that's the natural progression, which is kind of linear, right? I think post that, because of lots of reasons, again, family-based, I had to stay back and I had to shift into different kind of role, prioritizing, presence in Asia, closer to my parents. At that time, I think I joined Salesforce and I basically created the entire business value team for them. Mix of ex-McKinsey, Bain, BCG consultants, and then we got in the thick of, when you mentioned consultative selling.
Yep.
Right? And I really enjoyed it. I was very surprised, but I was very lucky to have a very, very good boss who really knew the Salesforce product, who had been in sales, and who really knew the commercial part of business value and was eager to teach it to me. And having that kind of support, then I had really good support from the sales leaders. And that became a really satisfying journey. The journey into Genentech was again more personal. I was trying to look for a solution for Alzheimer's, which my father had. And I was actually talking to lots of people here. First, I was pursuing trials, I think at Biogen, and then at Genentech. And then I don't know how it manifested, but I actually got an offer at Genentech through lots of conversations. And I took it because it made a lot of sense. They were trying to, what they used to call, deliver integrated customer experience. And I was specifically hired because they wanted IT to have a seat at the table with the commercial marketing people. And I was a good fit the way they saw it, because I would have credibility as a marketer, have been a CMO.
Yep.
And they knew I had the digital news because of my background at Amazon and Salesforce. And so that's how it came together.
Okay. And then, especially at Salesforce, you mentioned that you had a great boss, and then you seem to have excelled in something, that a lot of people think they know, which is consultative selling. Can you tell us a little bit more on what that is, and did that come naturally to you?
I was surprised, right? I had been a marketer all along, right? I was very humble when I went to Salesforce. I was like, I don't know whether I can succeed in this new function. But it came very naturally to me. So a lot of portion of the job actually is being able to grasp the subtleties and the nuances of the commercial transaction, because they're pretty complex. A second part of selling is actually being able to talk to people and understand very quickly what are the business outcomes they're looking for. What are sometimes the personal outcomes they're looking for in their careers. And being able to actually connect how your product or how your solution enables them both. And do it in the moment and have the courage to voice what you really think. So I think that's a unique combination. Even at Amazon, my boss used to say that you may not be the smartest person as a joke, but you have a lot of courage, which means that if I had a conviction of what I was thinking, and we can go into lots of things I did at Amazon which actually overturned the tenets of Amazon, the work I was doing. But you have to have the courage of your conviction to voice. So a lot of consultative selling is actually understanding what is preventing somebody to take action and being able to articulate what is the cost of inaction. And I think that just came together. But going into it, I didn't know that this would happen. And there was a very big uptick of me being pulled into all the difficult sales meetings with the sales leaders. And these sales leaders are still my closest friends. The VP of Marketing Cloud, the head of Singapore, we used to be really, really good friends because they used to always pull me into the difficult situations. And I think, if I'm factually correct, the top 10 deals we did in 2021, FY 2021, because financial year is February to end of January in Salesforce, my team and myself personally were engaged in all of them.
Awesome. So you got awesome outcomes doing what you did.
Yes, and this was all organic. I can still remember when I first went into this function, I didn't know I would succeed or not. I was very humble, but I had tremendous support from my boss. And then a lot of love and affection from the sales leaders. And I think all of it came together.
You said something very interesting just now. You talked about business outcomes, but then you also talked about personal outcomes for the person who's the deal maker on the other side of the table. Can you tell us a little bit more? Because typically when you talk about business dealing, salespeople almost always talk about business outcomes. do personal outcomes for the decision maker on the other side matter in the enterprise? Could you please elaborate a little bit?
They do matter. So I remember we used to do this checklist of things with salespeople on calls. Because as a business value person, you were also asked in the quarterly meetings, what is your opinion on a sales deal? And to actually know what's going on, I would have a lot of conversations with sales leaders leading up to the call. And one of the questions you used to ask them is, okay, why would this person buy this financial year? And often the question you tend to ask is budget, business outcome, as you mentioned. But I'd also like to understand, what is in it for them? Why is it important for them to take this risk this year? Because I've been the customer myself, right? So it's important to understand what is driving people to move the needle forward. So very often when you're purchasing Salesforce and you don't already have the licenses, it's different if you have it and you're just increasing the number of seats. That's not really the big nut. The big nut is new customer is actually taking risk to buy you versus something else, which also means that they're not doing something else. They're choosing to do this. It also means that they may not have enough Salesforce trained professionals, right? It also means that they're going to now have a new budget outgo, and so they are on the hook, so to say, internally to deliver, right? So the question is, why would a person take that risk? What is compelling them? Often it's just curiosity and the desire to do the best thing, and which gets to the outcome. But often it is very hard, and we'll probably get into this discussion on other dimensions today. But often it's the operating model of the company. It's taking your peers along with you. And so the question is, what is it for the person to do all this work? Mm-hmm. That's what we need to understand. Because oftentimes there is budget. It makes total sense, from a very business value perspective. The returns are 4x, 5x, but deals don't close.
So there's that missing angle of what's in it for that person that salespeople often tend to ignore. Yes. Or may ignore.
Yes, because and this is what happens when deals won't close. I'll tell you a story to illustrate what I'm saying. There used to be an Australian customer, and he had been very successful with Salesforce installations in Australia, and then he had taken over a bank in Asia. I won't name the bank, but we had gone through a whole process with him, and it was a great time. And we went through all the proposals, but he wouldn't close. And I remember being pulled into the meeting not by the head of sales, but the head of ASEAN, saying, "We don't know why this is not closing. Like, just come in and do your thing." So I'm like, okay. So I was in the meeting. We were going in, talking about the same things, and then I realized what the problem was, or what I thought the problem was, and I basically messaged and said, I think we might have something here, but I need license to ask the question. He said, yeah, please. So I told the Australian guy, I told it in a slightly colorful way, but I basically told him, look, there is a risk of not doing this, and there's a risk of doing this implementation, and we understand it. And we have mitigated the risk through the construct of wave 1, wave 2, because we know that you don't have internal talent to take up this job today. But then you came in here, took up this bank with an agenda of doing this, to take the bank forward, right, with a complete CRM system. So it's not about whether you buy us or not. It's about whether you need to take the risk to do this or not. If you buy us, we understand the risk and we mitigate it to the extent it can be mitigated. So another question is either you move forward or don't, And it was a very harsh thing to say to a CEO, quite bluntly, but to his credit, he kind of listened and then he laughed. And then the whole atmosphere changed in the meeting, and then he was like, okay, let's do it.
So you convinced him to take that personal risk, which he may or may not have articulated, but he clearly understood what you were trying to say.
Yes, I think he understood it very quickly. So he probably was aware of it, but it was not surfacing to himself as to why we're going in circles. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's what I mean by when you consultative sales is not just about all the other stuff we do, which is all good, which you have to do, but it's also about understanding what's preventing a person to take a decision.
Very interesting, Sanjeev. I think that's a great point to really get to know the person and what is his motivation in all of this. And what about leveraging technology in this process? What drew you to leveraging technology, and and then later on AI and so forth, specifically, I believe at your last position?
So it's a good question. It's a narrative I often used to tell people at the marketing folks at Genentech, because I wanted them to understand, I empathize. I've been, the way I saw myself is that I've been with a person who's been analog. Sure, I used to work with a lot of data, but it was mostly Excel and Access at McKinsey, right? But once I went to Amazon and started running a digital native business, and with the data sets we have, all the recommendation engines we had at that time, we were having to work with lots of big data sets and then use technology to use those data sets. Especially when I got to Kindle, the entire business was through the recommendation system, apart from all the marketing we did and all the stuff we did. But the core thing was you had to use that technology to actually progress the business, right? If you are running the business and you're investing in technology or using technology and then you're trying to solve problems, like, we used to have a lot of problems. Like, we used to get people through the entire process and then they couldn't make the payment. We had a 50% success rate in our, we used to call it PSR, right? That again, a technology problem, right? Everything was a technology problem. Like, if you want to do lightning deals in Diwali in India, just like retail was doing, it's a completely different tech stack for us. Again, a technology problem. If we launched Kindle in India, this was a time when Facebook had launched Facebook Lite. We had to decide, do we do Kindle Lite or not? That's another story, we'll go into that. But every business outcome that we wanted was solved or enabled through technology. And so that's how, I became savvy in technology. I wouldn't say I'm an expert. Like, even the AI work we did here, I would say, because now I'm a product line lead, I need to get into further detail, because now I'm also responsible for delivery, right? So I have to understand, okay, is the feature pipeline done? Is the data engineering done? So all this requires you to just keep learning things, right? And you have to be able to understand that you need experts to do things, not managers, especially when the technology is not mature. But the gist of it is that the journey since 2015, since I joined Amazon, has been almost everything I'm trying to get enabled is enabled through technology. So you have to get close to it.
Understood. So basically, that market, that particular consumer-driven market, is heavily driven by data and then data processing, which naturally led to the incorporation of AI over time as data science turned direction towards AI, right?
Yes. My point is that while some things are becoming mature, we have new technology coming in, which have new implications, and these are not mature. And so it's a lot of fun when it's not mature, but it's the hardest thing to do and get enterprise level outcomes when it's not mature. And that's where we are, I think, today, especially when we talk about using AI agents. It's the lack of maturity in the ops of that process. And that's why, sometimes when you want to go from pilot to production, that's the gap.
Yeah,
it's a skill gap.
We'll talk about that in more detail, Sanjeev. So, Sanjeev, you've led transformations in retail, in CPG, in pharma, and in tech. I mean, what are the core insights and principles that are, remain constant? What are the unifying factors here? Is it technology? Is it data? Is it AI?
I wouldn't say that. So if I look at the transformations I've actually achieved, right? So I took a brand of sunflower oil, which was losing money for 9 years, and then transformed it to a brand which empowers home managers. What was that based on? It was based on insights into actually what the problem was, which is keeping this brand from growing. In India at that time, if you had to buy oil, right, it was used as a traffic driver in mom and pop shops. So our MRP was 50, but we were selling it to the retailer at 35, 36, 37, 38, depending on the salesman. And they would then price it depending on whether they wanted to attract traffic to the shop at 40 or 45, and how much margin they wanted. But what it led at the back end for the housewife was that now she had to go to so many shops to get the best price. Now we solved that problem by saying the MRP now is only 40. First to do that, right? Then we said, okay, what does it actually mean to the housewife? Like, she's not acknowledged at that time in 1998, 1997. 1999, I think, the housewife was not really acknowledged for all the work she used to do, and she needed this recognition. And so we said, this enables you to provide the happiness you want for your family and manage it. And we put in home manager contest, and we made it into a branding. We did new advertising. So the whole thing was identifying the problem which was keeping it where it was, and then unlocking it with creative options. Again, the core is, what is stopping it from growing, right? So I think and then on Amazon we did lots of things which were increasingly technology enabled. But always the issue is, at Amazon, for example, the whole problem was we're getting everybody through the flow, and then there were 50% drop off at the purchase success rate. And then we were like, why is that happening? And then we realized that our our whole way of allowing people so many options was actually complicating it, and they would just get so confused they would fall off, right? So we had to solve that problem. So I think the core of it is, what is the problem? And this is maybe it is an Amazonian way, maybe it's a McKinsey way, I can't say now, it's all mushed up in my head, or maybe it's just my way, but it is like, what is the problem? Can we define it? Can we define it in an unambiguous way that everybody agrees? Then, can we look at creative options, which we think are messy, which means they are mutually exclusive, but collectively we feel they're exhaustive. Like, we really think that we've really thought about this very creatively. Like the whole reframe and Swikar was creative. It was not an apparent choice. And then, can we agree, or can I articulate in such a way that the recommendation I make is agreed to by everybody? In Swikar sales, my management, marketing, in Sears, many more people actually. It was being run by Eddie at that time. There were lots of leaders to convince. So then it's also a question of being able to articulate the solution and get people to see the solution and get them behind you. Nothing happens in big organizations without you having a broad support, especially if you're doing novel things. I did many novel things.
Very interesting. So then the unifying factor was problem solving essentially, right? Which was the core of it.
I guess. I think it was basically problem solving and articulating and being able to get people to understand. It's also communication. So I think people don't really understand why Amazon works so well. I think one of the reasons they work well is that they force you to write a document. I'm sure this happens in many organizations, but in Amazon I had to write a document for everything I did. And we don't start meetings before, like we're talking about each other. We just bring the document in, you read it, and then you ask clarifying questions to make sure you understand it. But all the data is in the appendix that you want to see. And then you basically agree with my recommendation, because you have the problem with the option, the recommended option, or you have a different recommendation which I agree to. So that discipline helps people understand where you're coming from.
Interesting, Sanjeev. And then Sanjeev, at Amazon, you launched and scaled the Kindle content business in India, from scratch, and then over a period of several years, you guys achieved 30% growth or significant growth.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned you incorporated data-driven decision making. Did you see signs of data intelligence or even AI in its earlier forms back then?
Yes, of course. So I'll say there are two parts to this. I'll tell you another story to sort of bring alive the first part. And then the second part is that entire business, I think we've talked about this briefly already, entire business was based on recommendation engine, right? So whether it's lookalike modeling or genre-based modeling, that engine was already there in Kindle content. We were leveraging it for our market. But I'll give you a data-driven, the way it works is that the vision for Amazon and Kindle was, in any market was, any book should be available in 60 seconds. I think Bezos says it more eloquently. Any book should be available in 60 seconds. But I'm paraphrasing. But what that implied in any market launch is that you should always have the biggest catalog at launch. Now, here's the data part, right? When I went to India, we were launching in 5 Indian languages, like Tamil, Marathi, Gujarati, Hindi, Bengali, I think. And then the thing was, we quickly found out that the average size of a book in these languages is 300 pages. The average cost to digitize one page in the Devanagari script was $1. And then we looked at the actual sales in the print section of these books, and we realized that even though there's 75,000 big catalog, most of the sales happen in the first 3,000. And these 3,000 are bestsellers. And every cohort which starts reading these books reads the same. In Hindi, they read Premchand. In Malayalam, they actually read two authors. Right? So the question was, how are they going to break even for the other 70,000 if you digitize them at a cost of $300 when you barely make like 15 cents per book on average? So the question was, we shouldn't be launching the entire catalog. But at that time in India, we already had other competitors who had the entire catalog digitized with VC money. So imagine, and we also had this tenet in Amazon that we only launch with the biggest catalog, otherwise we don't, because we want to give consumers the widest choice. Now imagine me writing a document saying, I think we should only launch with bestsellers, and here's why. Here's the data. And it went against the norms and tenets. So the first VP who saw that note wasn't agreeable to it, but the first SVP who saw the note was agreeable to it in the same meeting. And so we changed the tenet and we launched with bestsellers. So it's very data driven. Of course, they had more information which I didn't have. It so happened, I came to know later on that that company which had done digitization of 25 catalogs, which actually didn't have money left. They weren't selling enough to actually make a business of it. I didn't know all this. I just had my data and my reasoning. And this is the beauty of Amazon, right? It was against the tenet, but the document was written. I had to write it twice. The first time they said it not written it very well. But it went through. And then, of course, the entire running of the business was based on the recommendation engine, and then lots of other widgets we built out, both in merchandising and in the purchase options. They were all digital.
Sanjeev, you built that business from scratch. You secured deals with top authors. You launched so many new products and titles. I mean, what does it take? What are the critical steps to launching and scaling a brand new venture within such a large organization at Amazon? Many people find that daunting, right? They become a part of a product, but how do you launch a new product? What does it take?
Part of it was, I think, I was just very excited. but the important constituents of success, number one was that top management was never in doubt that India was a market they wanted to win in. And they specifically hired me to do this job. So there was a conviction from top management that this was a must win, and therefore the support, right? We had really good leaders. I always say that being an entrepreneur inside Amazon, being an entrepreneur is like playing a bowling game with the guardrails up. If you take too many mistakes, anyway, in a quarterly meeting, they'll figure out you made a mistake, so they will redirect you, right? I think I did lots of things which are very different from what was being done in other 9 markets. This was the 10th market. For example, I basically said that to win in India, because I'm not the first entrant, and economics don't support mass media campaign. We were spending money on the Kindle device, but not on Kindle content, and the mass media made no sense. It was pretty apparent. How do I get traffic, right, for content? Now, how do I get content in the first place? Again, I had to break the tenets. I think I can say this with confidence, and you should know Chetan very well. I think we paid him in advance, which was not. It was not a mechanism available before that, and I had to convince my people within my company. They were thinking of, all the finance guys said it should be 50,000, and I said 500,000, and I took a big risk, and it turned out that the advances against the 500,000 were paid off in 11 months versus a 5-year contract. And I did the same thing with the top publishers, and it had the same, we had a 3-year contract with them, and we actually paid off in the first 12 months. So all these risks we took to get a jump start on the selection, and the deals with the authors were exclusive. So if you wanted their books digitally, you had to come to our platform. That drove traffic, right? Those were some of the things which changed the game for us. There are also other decisions, which we can go into. One was convincing a lot of publishers that they should actually digitize, because they were very afraid of cannibalization. I still remember sitting in a Dallas airport and a call coming to me and saying, my vendor manager saying, look, this publisher in Marathi is willing to digitize only if the cost of E is greater than P. Now that's you never have the cost of a digital book greater than a print book, right?
Yep.
But I took a decision and said yes, with only one caveat, that if this is net not cannibalistic to him, we will re-engage after this period of time on the pricing. Because I fundamentally understood that a P plus E grows the size of the pie in the market. It doesn't cannibalize the way we think in simple terms. But to take those decisions in real time matter, because you have a launch coming up and you have to get the selection on board. So lots of things go into that growth.
Very interesting, Sanjeev. And Sanjeev, you did all of that at Amazon, and then you worked at something, like Pharma is heavily regulated, heavily specialized, but you had that background in consumer markets and SaaS. How did you use that to drive, using completely new technologies like AI? How did you drive a digital transformation at Genentech? Can you tell us a little bit more on how that market works, and what was the function of AI, and how was it deployed, and how was it used, at least at a high level?
Lots of questions in that, Manish, but I think I'll make it real. So yes, it is a highly regulated industry. The pace is different, and the need for regulations and to be very careful is required. It's absolutely merited, right? Even the need for technology, when I just started this at Genentech, was not really apparent. So I remember I was asked by the therapeutic area lead as to why they should have me on the therapeutic area leadership team. It's very important to be on the team, because that's where the decisions are being taken, that's where the business problems are surfacing, and so in real time you can think of solutions to those problems. I'll give you an example of that in a moment. But I knew I had this one-to-one with this person. He was like, what can you do for us? This person is a data scientist, this person is my payer lead, this person is my medical lead. Why should you be in the team, in the leadership team? And it's a very earnest question. And I remember in the moment I told him something which he then repeated, I think, ad nauseum to everybody he met in all the town halls. And the thing I told him was unprepared. I just told him in the moment is that what I will help you do is to get to your business outcomes faster and better with technology. And he heard me, and he like, okay. And he used to say the story in the town halls later on a lot. And he said, I didn't actually understand what he said, but it sounded intelligent. So I said, this guy, let's keep him, right? This is actually what happened. And then we were together co-leads on the whole transformation. Him, me, and there was one more person from business operations. And we had this situation where he called me one Thursday. I remember that I was in a workshop, and he called me and said, we have a problem. We have been committing to leadership, we'll get secure email done. So just to give you a context and background to understand, when we work with lots of doctors' offices for patients, because a lot of our drugs are expensive, and we want to help them get to the infusion centers. This is particularly for the drug called Ocrevus for MS. That interaction with the HCP offices, doctor offices, was being done through a secure portal site, like we used to have with banks. If you want to even see an email, you log into the portal and you see the email. As you can imagine, it's not very efficient. And doctors' offices have been requesting a simpler email way, but the email had to be secure. And for the longest time, before my arrival there, the compliance officer had been saying, no, whatever options IT is proposing is not acceptable to us. So now this guy calls me and says, I really don't understand the problem. I had committed to the US leadership team that we would get this thing done. It's not been done. It's been months. I forget how many months it was, 12 months, 18 months. But now I have an update to give as part of this boost effort we are doing, and I want you to look into it. And I'm like, okay. So then I looked into it and realized very quickly that only problem you have to solve is how do you do encryption at rest and encryption and transmission, because once it reaches there in the open, it doesn't really matter. The law doesn't matter. And the real problem, and I won't go into technical details, was that we as a company, because of the European roots, didn't trust Google servers. So then again, the whole MECE thing came in. I said, okay, this is the problem. These are the 4 options. Now, I can go into technical details of it, but basically we already had a system which was encrypted. We just had to move the emails once it came there into our own server and then send it back, right? And so we created that option as well. And for each option, I wrote the pros and cons, and then I wrote a note to the compliance officer, whom they used to meet on some frequency and who had been saying no. I had never met the compliance officer. I never met her. But I wrote this 3-paragraph note with one table at the bottom. It went there and she approved it in the next hour. That's when the light bulbs went off. That, okay, this is what it means to enable things through technology.
Very interesting. So again, technology-driven solutions, and Sanjeev, the pace of that has greatly accelerated today with AI. There are all these new developments. Do you see that happening, where these kind of technology solutions, there's so many more available just because of AI?
Yes. Let's take a broader perspective on this. So yes, I agree. But the thing is, for the kind of things that AI and then now Gen AI can enable, right? There are some non-negotiables, especially if you're in the financial service sector or if you're in pharma or life sciences, right? The first thing is that you have to be able to abstract away a lot of risk, and you have to have data organized. And when I say data organized, it means we have to know clearly who the owner is. We have to know who can work on data engineering to make the data accessible, and we have to know who has the rights to do application layer on it. This, what I'm saying, is not historically the case in most companies, because data ownership is historical. And then as you go into the operating model of part of it, when you start doing things, it becomes really messy. So first, having data, making it safe and secure for people to access, and then having it normalized and standardized and cleaned to be able to work on the application layer is a big job in itself. And I think some pharma companies have done a good job on it. Certainly the one I was at, I think we were quite advanced. But the data ownership issue was still there and is still there, right? The second issue in doing things is the operating model. So in large companies, the problem is that historically some things rest with IT, some things rest with shadow IT, and sometimes shadow ITs have bigger budgets than IT, right?
What is shadow IT?
Shadow IT is basically all the technology work doesn't happen in one institution. It happens for good reasons, for historically, really good reasons. It sits somewhere else. But then when you start collaborating and doing things, it becomes very important to understand the operating model. In fact, my presence in my role brought out the fact that we had an operating model to solve for. Because now the question was, does IT do this? And what does IT do? What does business operations do? What does shadow IT, which was business operations, do? Right? And whom does business go to? Right? All very good questions, right? And all resolved ultimately. But these things are very important to resolve in big companies to do this kind of work, right? And then you get to, okay, how do you actually do this thing? Because it's not mature. As I mentioned earlier, the ML part and the ML ops part is mature. But for each use case, you still have to sort of build by borrow ML. You could do it from companies which are existing out there. You can do it from providers like Accenture and Deloitte, and there are some specialist people like Palantir whom we have to use, and maybe the C3 AI can be used. There are lots of players like that. But ultimately, even after that, right, you then have to go to the place which is not mature, which is now how do you use the Gen AI part of it, right? How do you build an LLM twin? How do you build an agent and do that work? And that work requires risk-taking, it requires permission to fail, and it requires heavy linkage to business outcomes. So the top management must want that thing to happen and create room to take those risks.
Interesting. Sanjeev, by the way, you must add Insighto to that list as well, along with Accenture and C3 AI
of course.
and other companies. Now, Sanjeev, generally speaking, we keep on hearing the term enterprise AI, but that could mean so many different things, right? For some people, it means chatbots. For other people, it means complex predictive analytics. How do you define enterprise AI? in such a way that people understand, what resonates with C-suites and boardrooms? Is it a technology play? Is it a business outcome play? Is it a personal outcome play? How do you define enterprise AI?
Good question. So I had this question, I doodled on this question before, because a lot of leadership, non-technical leadership, business leadership get excited because you've got Google coming to them, Microsoft coming to them, get our co-pilots, right? There's a very big distinction between everyday AI that co-pilots do and role-specific AI, right? The value of an enterprise AI is in both, but it's I think largely, and I could be wrong, but this is my opinion, is in role-specific AI. So when we say enterprise AI, the question is, I'll make it tangible for you. So in marketing, today what a marketer does is, if they need some database insights, so from IQVIA data or from their own sales data or from the CRM data, how do they get that insight? They basically ask a question to the data science team. The data science team goes and queries the same data set, right? And then they get back the response, and then they make it into a PowerPoint or a document, and they bring it back to the marketing team. That's the process today. The question is, why can't the marketer ask the question to the same data set? And how do we enable it with the new technologies we have? Now that's very role-specific AI. So you have to think through the entire, which data do we need? How do we only give access to the data we need? How do we make sure that the response coming back is not hallucinating? So, but this is all fairly mature now in LLM engineering. So, you can create a feature pipeline, you can create a right training with RAG, you can get the inference pipeline, and you can make sure, with human in the loop that it's correct before you start publishing it. But now, suddenly, you've gone from days or weeks it takes for a query to come back through a person to instantaneous. And if you really study, and I've done this work, I've reimagined marketing process workflow through AI and Gen AI, so I speak with some conviction. The questions that marketers ask across different therapeutic areas are not very different. So you can actually solve this problem. And then it's not just a question of getting the customer insights. Once you get a customer insights and formulate your strategy, then the whole content thing, also AI and Gen AI can help. And in fact, companies are actually doing more work there, because the AI, including Gen AI, can help you populate the metadata, which was very hard to do earlier. Then it can help you access the data, search the data, and get back the responses faster, right? And then it helps you generate the data. So for example, a lot of pharma companies do a lot of derivative marketing. And there are two problems in that. One is that every time you want to change something, it might be a picture, or it might be a language, or it might be a headline change. You already have an approved ad, you're just doing derivative changes. You have to send it back to the agency. The agency does that same way digitally, send it back to you. And that's millions, tens of millions of dollars for a big pharma company. That a marketer should be able to do now. And I believe it's happening, right?
So they basically then have an agent, typically the way they're evolving, where they say, pull this data and organize it in this way. So everything that was done by the data science team, all of those data pulling and, SQL queries or whatever. So you basically have LLMs generate all of that and then orchestrate and build the final plots, so literally to that level?
Yes, yes. What you're talking about is the first part, the customer insights part. For the content part, right, it's usually the agency which does it. And they use multimodal LLMs. But marketers can do that too. And it will save the company tens of millions of dollars, which can go back to R&D, where they're having less efficiency and they have to fund more, right? And companies are doing this now. But there's another part to it, which is, even when you get back this thing, right, then it goes through a PRC process, compliance review process, which is manual. Why can't you create a Gen AI tool which actually checks everything and only brings a meeting, makes a meeting happen once it's already gone through the filters and checked everything, right? Because that's what happens in the manual meeting anyway. So now you've taken the PRC process, which takes typically 10 to 13 weeks, and compressed that as well. These things are already happening and should be happening at scale. But I'm talking about transforming everything, how you get the customer insights, right? How you do the content. And when I think I should say because I came up with it, I didn't even know this term agentic AI. I came up with this in June of last year. I asked a question. If I know the personas of the people I'm marketing to, and if I have a very mature pathway of getting them, so I know how to retarget them, I know what to send them, I know how to lead them to a page, and then get them to have a meeting with my TAM or FRM, like, why can't that be orchestrated versus people doing it manually? When we have a CDP, why is this being done like with people doing it for different channels? And I didn't know that this term agentic AI will be coined, and then we actually have a way of doing it now. But that again will also happen. There's no reason why LLM Twin can't take over and do all this work, especially for mature digital pathways. So I think just in marketing we talked about, the entire thing can be done with the help of these tools now much faster. And there is economic impact of doing this. That's the reason companies should do it. You basically compress the cycle to which you actually understand the moment of truth with the HCP and why he will shift from A to B from like 10 to 14 meetings to maybe like 6 to 9 meetings. And that at scale is a huge lift. And second, you compress the cycle of approval. You save money through all these things you do with the agencies, which again is a huge operating model change. So it's not going to happen in a day, but eventually it will happen. So you save money in the bottom line too. I think I'd done some calculation on this, which I may be off, but for a 10 billion company, you end up saving 750 million, which is a big number. This includes revenue uplift primarily and then some cost savings. For Genentech, it was a much bigger number.
Okay. And what about, once you've executed a project, for example, then do you look to replicate that success to other, business problems? Or, is say the technology stack and, or do you build an ecosystem trying to use the same AI platform or the same consulting partners to solve different problems? How do you do that? How do you partner? How do you build an ecosystem? And you've built ecosystems, you've built ecosystems at Salesforce, and then you've guided a big ticket deal, so business outcomes there. How do you see that playing out in AI?
So I think the second part is very clear. The first part was before the ecosystem question, was a question.
So basically, you have solved one business problem using AI.
I get it.
Okay, yeah. And then you have another different business problem. What do you keep constant and what do you change?
Yeah. Okay, I can answer in specifics. Right?
Okay.
Easier to understand. So when we did the secure email, for example, we did it for a small group of accounts for one therapeutic area. Then we scaled it to a larger set of accounts and to all the accounts. And basically we saw that we could reduce the time to infusion from 7 weeks to 5 weeks, which means a lot of money for the company and a lot of happiness with the HCP providers. So then we said, why don't we basically scale it across all therapeutic areas? So that's one way to do it, right? You take the same solution and you scale it across all therapeutic areas. The second is a more really good question, which is the whole ecosystem thing, right? So not to call out a Google provider, but what happens is that, I'll not take names, but as you were doing the work with all this NBA and everything, right? And I think I'll have to take the names for you to understand. We used Bedrock, then we used SageMaker. And what happened in the process is that we developed a lot of confidence in one cloud provider, and we ended up moving a lot of data into the cloud provider. Now, as a result of that, when we go next, even though how you abstract away which cloud provider you go to when you build the solutions, but because you already are working with somebody, unless something breaks, you tend to stay in the same ecosystem. It's important to architect in such a way that you've abstracted away which cloud provider you need to go to, and so you can choose. But in reality, what happens is that if something is working, you don't break it, right? If something happens with all the AI things you borrow or build, right? If they're working, right, you tend to stay with them. So the ecosystem kind of, if it delivers and it's not materially different from what's available out there, you tend to stay with them and grow with them, as you should, because you build the trust and it works for you, and if it works, then it works. So I think that's what I've seen happening. Like, you for example, if you were to work with somebody and you delivered something and there was nothing wrong with it and it could scale, it's more likely it makes sense for them to stay with you, right? So that's what ends up happening. But it's very important to be alive to the fact that some of the things we are doing today are not mature. Not a good example, really not a good example, but we were all using certain LLMs, and then DeepSeek came along, right? And very quickly now what has happened, I think because of DeepSeek, is that people are looking at Google a lot more than they used to look, because Google actually has got very less comparable costs, operating costs like DeepSeek, especially for the Google, I forget what it's called, Google 2 Gemini, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Gemini, and then other similar tools that host open LLMs and so forth.
It does make a difference. So you have to be alive to that, and so it's an evolving space.
Yep.
But that's how it practically works.
Yep. Okay. And then, in terms of deploying AI being a cross-functional game, that means that it must need new skills and different ways of working. Now, in such a scenario, as a business leader, how would you approach hiring, and how would you approach developing teams, especially in organizations that may not be technology first? Right? I mean, larger tech companies face their own challenges, but how does a non-tech heavy company do that? What would be your advice for leaders who need to upskill their workforce?
That's a really good question. I mean, especially when you frame it for companies where technology is not the core competence. So pharmas are technically savvy, but technology is not their core competence. For example, neither for CPG, right? But how do I say this nicely? Because it affects me also. But I think when you are using new technologies, you need, for lack of a better word, an expert as a leader. And you need to hire experts. Now, if you don't have them, that's when hiring people, borrowing technology or borrowing help technologists from outside, whether it's your company or other companies, becomes really important. I think the way I see it, and I may be a population of one, so it's my opinion, right? But my opinion is that a lot of these companies where technology is not the core competence have leaders sitting in technology who are managers. So when you're a manager, the speed at which you progress is much slower. And so the fundamental thing that these companies have to do is to attract talent who have specific personal need to come and do this for companies of their type. So for example, why would I work for Genentech, right? It was because of my personal looking for a solution for my dad, and then really understanding that, the way I used to look at pharma companies is very different when you have a personal need, right? So you have to bring in talent which buys into your purpose and wants to use the skills they have to do this. That's why it's difficult to hire the right people. A lot of these companies have got really savvy IT managers. But savvy IT managers are really useful for mature stuff. And there's a lot of mature stuff to be done. But when you are innovating, the pace and the skills you need are different. And I think I would hire for expertise, and I would hire for the same things I've always hired for: attitude and confidence. Because you have to have learning ability. And then you have to have the ability of storytelling and carrying people with you too. So I think those things are what I'd look for.
Understood. So again, compliance can be managed around that. One of the things that you said is that you need the human in the loop, but then you need a fallback mechanism.
What I mean by that is you need a human in the loop, and you need to be aware that what am I tracking as a failure, and if failure happens, how do I pull it back? Because what you don't want to happen is the wrong thing for the patient. But the business is such that before it gets there, you have a lot of leading indicators. So you want to be able to manage that all the time. Because there's one place you can't lose trust. That's there.
Things like agentic AI, the move is towards giving more control to the AI. So are you trying to say that there needs to be equivalent observability built into all of that, and tracking it through the flow of the complete system so that you have a fallback mechanism. Would that be the right approach?
That's very that's a very good question in the sense that we all know that at some level we can't observe what actually happens in an LLM. We know that technically,
Yeah.
right? That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the outcome which the agent takes. We need to be able to regulate that, right? And we need to be able to track and regulate that fast if things go wrong. And therefore, I think it's okay to go slow in terms of how much control you give away, but it's not okay not to solve those problems at a really fast pace.
One of the key things that you mentioned just a bit ago is making sure that the patient benefits from it, and there are so many different journeys, that customer journey. It's a complex product within a regulated environment. How do you essentially see AI reshaping the customer journey, Sanjeev?
Oh, that you're coming to a passion topic now. so it's actually happening today, right? I won't name the company, but I'm a real fan of the founder. What they are doing is they are basically enabling voice AI conversations in such a way that when a customer gets a choice, they want to have that conversation with the AI. And it sounds like a chatbot, but it's actually much bigger than that. So that is actually happening as we speak. But I think the passion that I have, especially in US, is that how do I get more financial transparency faster to customers? And I actually created a product for that, which I don't know how to incentivize the ecosystem to actually build it as to who will pay for it. But I don't understand why I shouldn't be able to know if I have to go get an X-ray, what it will cost me if I turn left from my house or if I turn right from the house. And why shouldn't it make it simple enough for me to know? Because we know about everything, but we don't know about medical procedures easily. How do we make that easy? And I think that problem will also get solved eventually. That's more of a consumer thing than a enterprise thing. But I think the incentives and who will pay for it will make it more of a B2B2C thing. And I won't go into details of it, but it's something which I personally have worked as a passion project.
Are we going to see more of that from you in the future? More details or perhaps a product launch?
Let's say stay tuned.
Okay, awesome. Through these years, the last several years, you would have seen many companies run pilots, but then we keep on hearing stories that companies are struggle to roll them out at scale. What does it take, and how can leaders ensure that successful pilots become enterprise-wide programs? Why do they fail, Sanjeev? What is the biggest barrier to for pilots to scale?
I guess you can't put everything into one bucket. I have been owners of failed pilots. The number one reason I think things don't scale, if you've proven the proof of concept, is because it is not enabling a business outcome which is important to leadership. I don't think we kind of have talked about this topic in a few different times in the conversation today, but I think that is the number one reason, and we should respect that, because you got to respect what leadership thinks is important. Assuming the right people are in the job, and they're generally the right people in the job, right? That means that investing in that is not really important. So then the question that you may ask is, why did you do the pilot in the first place? Right. So I've always believed that you shouldn't do a pilot if you don't have top management commitment to scale it, unless it's a research project and requires serendipity and cover to go do things. And serendipity sometimes gets you great outcomes. I mean, the entire 3M company is built on that, right? But in most companies, if you're just doing a pilot, then you should be ready for what happens to it if it's not aligned to the business output. What happens in reality is that when you're doing the pilot, you think it's important. But when it comes time to productionize it, the budget required to do that now is basically saying, should I put the marginal dollar here or somewhere else? And that's a fair question to ask always.
Understood. Understood. So again, being more outcome driven,
Yes.
that's the single most important thing. Sanjeev, there's so much going on in the world of AI and enterprise AI. People talk about AI being a disruptor, right? But there are these established companies like Pharma, right? How do established players in these traditional sectors guard against disruption with AI, even if they've been working on AI? And is leveraging AI today an offensive strategy?
I think most companies are very thoughtful about it, right? They understand that this is not something they can ignore, and they're leveraging it, right? Without going into details, like companies are wise enough to even ask the question, does it make sense for me to build my proprietary LLM? Now, it may not seem obviously the right answer to do, but it's good that somebody asked that question, because a lot of your data is proprietary, right? And I think RAG now has abstracted away the concern people had over, oh, my data is now going into LLM and then it'll actually use it. I'm not a cybersecurity expert to say that can't be done, but I think it's fairly secure now, so the need to develop your own LLM is less. But the larger point I'm trying to make is that people are being very thoughtful in different parts of the value chain in pharma of what they do with this new technology, as they should, right? Just because my passion is in the commercialization stage, I didn't see no reason not to do it. Of course, you'll do it in a very careful manner. You have to solve for everything we talked about, but that just is very important, I think, for the pharma industry in particular, and for any company which wants to lead, because what you generate as velocity there in revenue uptick and cost savings can refunnel back into R&D where it's required, because the entire pharma industry is going through more and more investment for shorter and shorter TAMs, addressable markets. So it becomes very important. I think tools are also being used in generating new proteins, as you know very well, for much longer, and those will continue.
Yeah, the move towards more drugs for rarer diseases is there. Sanjeev, to add to what you said, RAG abstracting away, whether my data is going to the LM because only the vector database, queries go to the LLM. There's also this interesting move towards open models, right? So you can actually take an open model and host it yourself on your own set of machines. There's Llama and there's Mistral and now there's DeepSeek and there are others. And we at Incyto are launching, very soon a product called Automaton, which essentially enables you to do this in a very easy way. So there are technology solutions to this as well, just to add to what you said, around the LLM itself as well, because you can actually host an open LLM, and even if you upload stuff to it, you're essentially hosting the LLM yourself, so the data stays protected. So there are advancements in models, and these models have become really competitive. DeepSeek has shown that as well. Sanjeev, we're approaching the end of our conversation. I've truly enjoyed speaking with you. You obviously have very deep perspectives and lived experiences. Where do you see enterprise AI go in the next 5 years?
I'm very excited, and I actually don't know the answer. I think corporations will do a lot of stuff, right? Enterprises will do a lot of stuff, but I'm actually more excited for, and a little bit concerned about what it will do for the executives and how it will, how they will need to adapt. I'm not a philosopher, so I listen to Reid Hoffman, who's a philosopher and a technologist, right? And he puts it in a very interesting way, which is actually quite alarming, which is like, this is akin to a change of printing press. And when you got to the other side of the printing press, like after there's a whole war on who can print the God's word, the world transformed. But that period was pretty long and pretty painful. So I don't think it'll be that long, but I wonder how painful it could be.
Could be dark.
Right? And But I always think that there are people who thrive in change and learning new things, and this period will reward those kind of people more. So there is a adaptability and a learnability which you need to have as we go into this new world. Without that, it'll be more painful.
Sanjeev, that's actually demonstrated in your success across industries. And you have that problem-solving mindset that you talked about, right? I think those are the keys, right? And that adaptability, it seems, right? So adaptable people would survive and thrive.
And curiosity. Right?
Curiosity, okay.
Because you have to be curious enough to learn. So lots of things we talked about today, like I didn't know them like 3 years ago. So I've been learning, right?
Yeah.
I think that needs to continue.
Yeah. I don't know what RAG was a couple of years ago.
Right.
Nobody knew that.
Maybe only Andres Karpathy knew that, right? Or Maxim Lebon or all those people, right? So I think we need to be curious enough to learn that and really understand it and start to be able to use it to get production-ready outcomes.
Understood, Sanjeev. Sanjeev, it's been a pleasure talking to you. What did we miss? Did we miss any other important issues that you're passionate about in enterprise AI or digital transformation? Any final words of wisdom for our audience?
I think we didn't spend too much time on the fun part of it. I've had a lot of fun doing this. I truly have. I enjoy it. And it gives me a lot of energy. And it is amazing sometimes, even little things, when people come and tell you, oh man, because of you, we've crashed the TTFI by 2 weeks. It's very fulfilling, right? And so I think that part we haven't talked about a lot. This technology enables lots of things, which helps us do things faster and better. And I think that's the reason to do them.
Yeah.
Right. And
the scale could really be shocking of what AI can do.
Yes. And I think it will transform a lot of functions like marketing. And I'm looking forward to it. Right. I'm excited about it.
Yeah. So you want people to go explore.
Yes.
And how should one start doing that? If you've been on the sidelines of AI, how do you get into it today?
I think there's no. In fact, there's too much noise about it, and there are lots of people who are actually sharing a lot.
Yep.
I still think that for the most basic things, right, I would actually just go through the Andres Karpathy YouTube videos.
Yep.
He explains it really well, and he doesn't waste any time, just gives you the real deal, right? So if nothing else, you should do that. But of course, I have done lots of stuff. I've gone through lots of, like he even says in some interview that you have to put 10,000 hours into it.
And
you will waste a lot of time learning it. I don't think I've actually put 10,000 hours, but I have put a lot of hours where when looking back, I've said, oh, I wasted all that time. But I don't think that you know in advance you're wasting time. You just have to spend the time. So I think that's the best way for people. Just get into it. Try to understand it.
Keep up with the changes that are happening on a daily basis, right? But once you have a foundation, you can build upon it as well, right?
I think there's anything like playing an instrument, playing a sport, doing any work, developing any skill. There's a period which you have to endure, just, for lack of a better word, sucking at it, right? Before you get the dopamine reward for it. I think this is something different.
Very interesting, Sanjeev. I've enjoyed speaking with you today, Sanjeev. Thank you so much. You've been a seasoned executive, a thought leader in digital transformation, AI, data-driven marketing. Really enjoyed speaking with you, and thank you so much for your perspectives on AI, Sanjeev.
Thank you, Anish. Thank you for having me. Thanks.